Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious with Fatima's narrative, the direction that you went in with that particular tale, especially towards the end, was so heartbreaking and so painful. And I'm curious what guided you in the writing.
The story. But I didn't think it was that painful. Well, the Fatima story is an invented story, but I also referenced at least two major storylines. One was the descent of Inanna, which is an old Babylonian myth that is repeated over and over. It's the same myth as Persephone going into the underworld. It's the same. It's Aliens 3, Sigourney Weaver going into except of course with Hollywood, Sigourney Weaver goes into the underworld and shoots the motherfucking alien. So I was interested in that, and I did that part of the story. The second part was sort of a distortion of an old Arabic tale, which is Majnun and Layla. And Majnun and Layla is, again, a very famous old tale, but it's, Romeo and Juliet, it's West Side Story, it's a lot of things. But the important thing about Majnun and Layla is how the story has developed in various places around the world. And I was particularly interested in various Indian versions of the story, because in most of the stories, and I consummated the affair because I had turned Majnun and Layla into Majnun and Layl, and Majnun and Layla never consummate their affair, but since now they're two boys, they're gay, they must consummate. I mean, there's no such thing as unconsummated gay sex. It doesn't exist. But the whole idea of the story becomes the ineffable, and that the quest becomes much more important than attainment. And it's supposed to be, the whole idea behind religion, that it's the searching for God that's much more important than actually finding Him. So I was interested in that part, as in that what the love was it's the idea was searching for something, the constant search for something, and I turned it into a constant search for sort of within a family of something. So I did not think at all it was devastating. Because the other part of it, to me, that wasn't devastating because partly it's mythical, so it's not real. But I did get attached to the boys, and they were one and the same. That was what was important to me. That it wasn't, the black boy or the white boy, or it was one and the same. They're one and the same person.
Stacey, is there a question?
Question.
Yes.
You have a quote from Rabih Alameddine
Yes.
about stories not belonging to the person who writes them, and once they have been told, they're everyone's. I was really interested in how that informed your writing, and specifically what you felt the cultural relevance was to that whole idea of stories belonging to everyone.
Don't know about cultural relevance. I get in trouble when it comes to cultural relevance. First, if you haven't read Marias, you should. He's a god. And this is a theme of his that gets repeated over and over and over. I think in his last book, which is actually 3 parts, I believe he begins with the book with "Don't ever tell anybody anything." But this whole idea that we can tell a story and that story belongs to me is ridiculous. Because, I posit the theory that there is no such thing as originality. we're getting into a time where it's like originality is separated from sources, as in, or people always assume that something is original if it comes out of a vacuum. And I find that fascinating. It's like I could go on and on and on about that there is no such thing. There's nothing that is, if that's a definition of original, there is no such thing as something that's original. You know, I mean, if you go back to Shakespeare, people would come into the theater knowing exactly what the story was. And this is not just the histories. We're talking the comedies, the romances. They knew the stories. The Greek tragedies were repetition of the same stories over and over. Same as we have an opera or whatever. But now everybody believes that all of a sudden something is original. And all art is artifice. It is, you know, it is based on something that has come before it, including stories. You know, what makes a story original is how it is told, the perspective that it offers. I know for a fact that in none of the Baybar stories, and there are over 1,000 of them, has there ever been a dominatrix prostitute who saved the Islamic Empire, which is a shame. There has never been a, you know, Majnun and Layla story told with, you know, two male demons, twins, you know, and I can't tell you what changes or how the changes, but everything changes with just a little touch here and there, so that no story can be repeated without it being changed. So this comes to, for me, and one of the things that I try to do in this book is not talk directly, but find out what happens when you have all these, when people start believing these stories. I believe that belief is the enemy of everyone. Because, you know, the stories, whether you look at Jewish stories or Christian stories or Muslim stories or even Mayan stories, they're the same stories. But particularly the stories that came from the Middle East, they're exactly the same stories. But then what begins to happen is somebody tells them. The minute you tell them, something changes. And then people start believing these changes. And as opposed to looking at the entire story, we start looking at little teeny bits and believing that that's the case.
I was just wondering, as you were writing these, how you intended for the Baybars and Fatima stories to reflect, or how they connect with the story of Osama.
I was trying to find a new way to write a novel. I was trying to find a new way to tell a family story. Part of the troubles we have with novels is that it's really difficult to express certain feelings, particularly, let's just leave it. It's really difficult to paint a family picture realistically. So what I tried to do was reflect, have the sort of the mythical stories, the fantastical stories, elucidate and reflect what was happening, and have sort of the stories of the family shed new light onto these mythical stories. In many ways, they're one and the same. They're supposed to interweave and show you something in a new light, and they're supposed to be telling a great tale. You know, that's the main function of the book. But there's a lot of reasons for it. Partly it's because the character of Osama is somewhat of a passive character, and I'm interested in that. So that he's unable to sort of express or tell his father how he feels. So all of a sudden, when it's really going tough, you have Baybars meeting his father and mother and then celebrating. It echoes when he goes back to the wedding, and the wedding of his sister, and it's the same words that were used. So that this repetition of the story in various forms is supposed to build upon the character, because there's It's difficult to write a character with someone who's that quiet. It's difficult to write, or that loud, really, the other side of it. Because I find a lot of writing these days to be very frustrating. To be repeating some things that we've dealt with for generations, and not really reflecting what we do. And I'm not sure I succeeded. I just think that I tried a different way.
I just wanted to know, like, how long did it take you to write this? And more of a technical question, like, reading this, like, the reader can get a little confused and keeping track of the stories, the way it jumps around. How did you keep it all sorted out?
The book took 8 years. 8 long, tough years. My psychiatrist loved me.
And how many pages?
The first draft was 1,300 pages. And I fought tooth and nail for every single one of them, and lost every single time. I wish I can tell you. It's one of those things where it's, I mean, it sounds bragging, but it's not. I'm a mathematician. That's how I started. I have an engineering degree. I sucked the big one as an engineer, but I was very good at mathematics. And it's one of the talents that I have. I may not be a great writer. I may not be, good with words. But I can keep things in my head and keep relationships and spatial relationships in my head. It took me 4 years of writing rubbish. I had all kinds of stories. But once I got what I was trying to do, the whole thing sort of fits into place. I don't like writers who have a lot of control, and I don't like readers who require a lot of control. There's something in the process of reading that I like, which is to let go. And that is a big deal for me, to just release the expectations of where you want it to go or where you should think this should go, which is why I get, I get people either who love it or hate it, and that's absolutely fine, because predictability is utterly boring.
But nonetheless, you've created a whole identity and ability to write fiction in English, which not many people do. I mean, I can count on one hand those who've done it successfully, Nabokov and Kundera, moving in French. Well, that's debatable how successful that is. But how do you feel as an American writing in English?
Actually, I feel fine. I've never thought about it. I've never thought down and said, I'm going to write in English, or should I write in Arabic? English is the only language that I could or want to write in. I'm a lover of the language. To me, English is the most amazing language. The way that you can put words together in English is not available in any other language. But also my problem is that Arabic, the Fusha, which is the classical, just as a quick explanation, the written Arabic is very different than the spoken Arabic. And written Arabic is not spoken as a rule. So that if I were to write in classical Arabic, it would not be how I think. And that is a difficult thing. Some writers are able to pull it through, but for a lot of writers, I find it very difficult because you're writing in a foreign language. So if I'm going to write in a foreign language, I want to write in a language that I'm sort of comfortable with. But then at the same time, I don't think English is a foreign language to me. I think English is a foreign language to Americans.